I received a question and really a statement from one of the readers of the Unbound Soul in regards to the path of awakening that I took and what the individual described as a very extreme approach to the awakening process. And what this individual meant by extreme was not explained. Upon inquiry, it seemed that the perception was the vision quest process, for example, staying out in the day, staying out in a forest in a small area with no food for 4 days and 4 nights, alone in the weather, getting rained on, and basically having going through some kind of hardship, or the trip to the Amazon and the psychotropic Nitim, which I took, and the pain that that entailed, as well as maybe possibly even the years of training in the martial arts. Those things were viewed as extreme. But what's important to understand is how we define extreme. So, understanding that the vision quest itself was a process that Native peoples all around the world, all cultures, took part in. It was a simple rite of passage, usually at about the age of puberty, that everyone went through, and by no means did people think of it as extreme. It was just required, and it was beneficial. And they understood that when we're comfortable, we maintain the same usual patterns because there's no need to change. And so the Vision Quest is specifically designed to put you in an uncomfortable situation alone with no distractions, so you will, of course, see your patterns and ultimately find out, discover what your true path is, or what is really calling you, what is truly meaningful, and what is not. When you're in a Vision Quest circle for a long enough, for 4 days, you cannot help but to review your life over and over and over again and notice all of the time that you've been wasting on trivial matters. People tend not to do that when they're comfortable at home and they can go and have, some pie and watch TV and surf the internet and basically just distract themselves from the messages their subconscious is trying to get through to them. I'm not sure I would call it extreme, but to this person that was considered extreme. What I would say is that it was just normal, and in fact, society is at a huge disadvantage now. And a lot of the reasons I think we're having the trouble we're having in modern society now is because we don't have rites of passage like the Vision Quest. Another rite of passage for people in the Amazon, and also lots of other people around the world, and certainly almost all ancient cultures, use psychedelics regularly, and it was a regular part of their, not all cultures, but many, that psychedelics were a regular part of their spiritual tradition, and they knew that they would have to go into these hard experiences, and the benefit that they got from it was a change of attitude towards the hard experiences. If we describe them as extreme, really fundamentally there's an attitude that we have towards them, towards hardship, that may be holding us back. And you really can't address that attitude if you're not putting yourself under pressure. And that's just the reality of life. It's very easy to be comfortable in your armchair. It's very easy to maintain the habitual deadwood static, uninspired, meaningless or meaningless activities and patterns and habits and attitudes that we've always had. Now, I don't think Vision Quest is necessarily required for everybody, or psychedelics was necessarily required for everybody. I had a few trips that I had to go through. I had the Vision Quest processes that I had to go through. I had a number of naturally occurring mystical experiences that I had to go to that were also not easy. The training I did in Japan, that wasn't easy, but it was necessary. And that's the key terminology. It was necessary for this one. And I suspect that those things or similar things may be necessary for everyone. If we look at Eckhart Tolle, it's the first book I read after I had my awakening, a big awakening when I was 22. One of my students actually gave me the book Power of Now, and I read it. And she gave it to me because I felt so alone. I thought I was the only one who had had this kind of awakening, and I felt like I didn't have anybody to speak to about it. When I read the book, I realized that he had had a similar type of awakening. But if you read the story of what occurred to him that led to that awakening, it was extreme. He was in an incredibly nihilistic, but he didn't say suicidal, but if you look at the way he described it, probably suicidal state. And he had an ego death. That was an extreme experience. It wasn't pre-planned, but he had to go through it. The only question is, what is necessary for you? For each of us, it'll be different. Some of the things that we need will come about unexpectedly. And some of the things we'll feel pulled to. It may be a vision quest. It may be, a trip to the Amazon to experience Natim, and it may be, meditation. It may be an extremely physically painful event, an injury. I got run over by a horse. I learned a lot from that. It may be death. We may not awaken at all until we're staring in the face of death. One of my junior high school students, when I was teaching in Japan, was a very incorrigible young youth and quite disagreeable and highly intelligent, but quite rude, and a very good athlete. And he would put his effort and time into really trying to make class miserable for teachers. And I remember at one point he became very, very weak and sick, and he had to go into the hospital. And we didn't see him for some time, several months, maybe 6 months. He was out. And one day during one of our festivals, he came to school and visited me. And he asked me if I could spend some time with him. He wanted to talk with me privately, and he told me that he hadn't told anybody else, any of the other teachers this, but he felt I would understand, because sometimes I talked about spiritual awakenings and things like that, kind of meaningful content in my classes. I taught English and computer related class, but I oftentimes interspersed discussions that would make people think about their lives or have a new perspective. And so he actually appreciated this because he had had a disease that was breaking down his body, and it would lead to an early death, so the doctor said. And while he was in the hospital, he was in the same room with several other elderly individuals who were, had cancer, or, they were on life support, that sort of thing. They could talk, and so they would spend their day talking, and he would hear how they would sort of lament their lives and how they didn't do what they were passionate about or didn't follow their meaning, and they felt that they had wasted their lives. And their unanimous advice to this young man is, live your life fully, live with love, and live respectfully, and show appreciation. And that really changed him. But had he not been in that hospital suffering from this wasting disease, he'd never have been exposed to that. And even if he had been exposed to it, he wouldn't have been in a place where he was open, because there was so much arrogance. And this wasting disease really just tore down the arrogance. And then he was able to hear. And then he said in our meeting that he was actually glad he had this disease, because his life is so much richer and more meaningful now than it had ever been before. And so sometimes we need these extremes to shock us out of, or knock us out of our arrogance, to knock us out of our comfort zones, to knock us out of our stagnation. Don't shy away from the extremes sometimes, because really maybe they're not extremes so much as they're necessities. Life's not going to be easy. It never is, even for one who's had a certain degree of awakening. We still have a body, and the body can break down. The body can have diseases and sicknesses. When we go through aches and pains, at some point this body's going to die. We can't bring it with us. So in a way, life is funneling us into letting go, into surrender. Now we can surrender in a way that is negatively, like the association of losing and feeling that life has no meaning to it, or we can surrender into the grand meaning of it all, appreciation. And that's what I would suggest. Surrender into the grand meaning of it all. Let's see. The update before I sign off. I'm opening up a Vision Quest. It will be in late June, early July. And you can find out more information at my website, www.richardhaight.net. And hope to see you there. Blessings. Bye-bye.